Did you ever have to update multiple records inside the Fusion Manage? Because you maybe used the import features and had to post-process the data afterwards? Or maybe you had to transition multiple records to a new workflow state because you changed the workflow configuration? Or maybe you had to update item details because you added some new fields and you wanted to make sure that also the existing data now have valid properties inside of these fields. If so, you probably used the export and import features in the past of Fusion Manage, but also figured out probably that sometimes you need to use some scripting and even API calls to really get the job done. Now the good news is that I added a new utility to my PLM UX extensions, which helps the administrators to get this kind of tasks done very quickly, and I called it the Data Manager. And this is what we're going to have a look at today. So if you download the UX extensions after March or starting with March 2025 and you open the landing page, you will notice that the administration utilities now have a new utility at the beginning of the list, which is the Data Manager. You can open up the Data Manager by using the data endpoint, but let's have a look at the documentation first, because you will see that there is a lot of documentation of the features of this utility included. It also describes the various options that you can select because it really covers a lot of use cases. But most importantly, it does not require any setup. You don't need to create any workspaces, no rules, no access permissions. You simply can go ahead and start it. And so let's do so. Now this is the utility, and you can see it has a lot of controls, a lot of options because it's very versatile. But before we have a look at all of the details, let's start with 3 use cases first, so that I can show you how to use the application. In the first use case, I want to show you how we can change the owner for processes in a specific workspace to another user, which might be of relevance if a given user, for example, is sick or even left the team or the company. So in this case, I want to browse for change requests which are owned by a specific user and change the ownership to myself. So I simply switch the workspace to the change requests. I scroll down a bit, and then I want to filter for the processes which are owned by the user. So I select the user, and I will immediately figure out that there are 23 matching processes which are owned by this current user. And therefore, I now can select the action to define that the new owner should be set to another user. So in the second column, I simply select the action that I want to perform on this 23 records. And then I just click the Start button. And now the system will automatically change the owner for this given processes and provide an output on the right-hand side so that I can follow up what's happening. I can see the processes that were modified. I can even click these processes if I want to validate the outcome. And in the end, I can also see a summary. Let's go ahead with the second use case. And in the second use case, I want to show you how we can transition processes which are still in an early state of the life cycle or in the workflow to another workflow state. So in this case, I just want to go to the problem reports and I want to filter for processes which are still in a create status, and I want to kick them off. I want to let the users work on these processes. And maybe we can quickly clear the console because it's getting messy. But I just want to select the processes which are currently in create status, and I want them to be transitioned to the in review state. So you can see that currently right now we have 16 matching program records which are in create status. And this time I will just select another action which is called the transition. And in here I will find all of the transitions that are available in the workflow of this problem reports. And here I will just select the submit action, which will transition all of these workflows from create state to in review state. So I just enter a comment in here because the comment will be recorded in the workflow action, of course. So once we click on the start button, we can now see that the problem reports will be processed step by step to the next lifecycle status or the workflow status. And again, in the summary, we can find the outcome. Now, let's finish this with a third example, which is of relevance specifically if you want to use the UX extensions package itself, because sometimes they require a DMS ID property for all of the computed fields. So for example, for the change orders, you can invoke a change impact analysis, but this requires to have the DMS ID stored in a details field in the item details of the change orders. And this gives me the chance to show you how we can also update the item details fields of the records. So let me switch to the change orders workspace. And in this case, we are not going to use any filter on the left-hand side. We are going to process all of these 18 change orders that we have in the system right now. And you can see that there's a specific action here on top, which is called the store DMS ID. And in here, I just select the field that I want to use in order to capture the DMS ID. I click it in here. And then I once again simply click the start button. And now the system will locate the given records, process them one by one, and then also store the DMS ID in the property fields. So you can see within 2 minutes, we processed a lot of data. We applied some changes that would have taken us a lot of clicks if you wanted to do this with the out-of-the-box features. And this just shows how easy this utility is. Now, let's have a look at the details. The application is used in 3 steps. First, you need to select the data you would like to process. Secondly, you have to define the action that you'll be taking on the matching records. And then finally, we will also have some options, like post-processing and runtime options. Now, when we select the data, obviously, we first of all have to select the workspace. This is the first thing that we have to do. And as soon as we change the workspace, you can see that the screen will refresh, because depending on the workspace that you select, you might have more or less features in the other controls. For example, right now I selected a workspace that has a workflow. Therefore, in the filtering panel, I can now filter by the workflow status. On the other hand, if I go to a workspace that is revision controlled, I will be able to filter by the lifecycle and, for example, define that I want to process the working or released data only, or also filter for the latest data only. So the controls and options really depend on the workspace that you use for the processing. Now, when we filter the data, we also have a lot of features on the left-hand side. And it starts with the workspace view selector, because you can locate the records to process either by using the filters that will be shown at bottom, like the status filter, workflow filter, and so on. But maybe you already have a workspace view that would provide us exactly the data to process. If this is the case, you can also simply select one of your workspace views, and now the data in this view will be processed. So we're not going to query for data any longer, but instead the data inside of this workspace view will be selected. You cannot combine the filters and the workspace views. Therefore, the controls will be hidden once you select the workspace view, because now the view will be driving the data set to be processed. But if you do not select a workspace view, we will have a lot of filters here. Now, we saw that we can already filter by the workflow status. So you can select from the status and either select records that are in a specific status, or select items which are not in a specific status. Both is possible. And keep in mind that all of the filters, the more you add, all of the filters, they will be added with an AND condition. So we will only process the data that meets all of the filters. So if you would define that you want to select the ones that are in status cancelled and the ones which are not in status cancelled, obviously we will not process anything. So let's rewrite this back, but this would be the workflow status filter. Now, there's a specific control then in the center where we can filter for the item details. And you can see here that we will find all of the item details in here, which could be a date field, for example. And I can also add further ones if I want to. Let's say we have priority, and maybe we also want to filter in the title, for example. Right? So you can add multiple properties in here and now apply filters to each of these fields. So if it's a date field, we can have some ranges that we can select from. If it's a pick list field, priority is just a text field. Therefore, I'd only have blank or not blank. Or if it's a single line text field, you can see we can also filter for contains and does not contain, or starts with, or is blank, is not blank. Now for these filters, please keep in mind that this is the very first version of this utility. So if you select a pick list here, or if you select a multi-pick list or image field, there won't be any specific filters here beyond is blank or is not blank. You only get this comprehensive list of filters for text field and date fields for now. But if if you need more complex filters, please make use of the workspace views, because then you can define these filters in very complex conditions as well. Now, finally, at bottom, we can also filter by the item summary data, like ownership, creation date, last modification date. And here we have the same capabilities. So we can also select predefined ranges, or select the records within a given number of days, or even a between filter. Just a quick remark about the between filter. You can also make use the between filter to define that you want to process something starting after a defined date or before a defined date. You do not always have to define both of these dates. So if I would just select this between date with the start date, now the system would process everything after this 3rd of August or 8th of March. Getting lost in formats. So you do not always have to define both dates. You can if you want to really have a specific range, but it can also just be the upper or the lower end for filtering the data. But you can see there's a lot of things on a lot of features already that allow you to really specifically select the data to process. Now the second column now gives us the chance to select the action that we want to take on these records. And there are a lot of pre-configured actions already. We saw that we can, for example, store the DMS ID in the given records, which is of great help every time you want to use the computed fields and create a link that users can click on and need to pass the DMS ID in the link. Therefore, we just added this here on top, also because this makes it easier to deploy the UX extensions. Now, the second one gives us the chance to set a default value in a specific field. So maybe we want to predefine a specific value for a specific field. Then we simply select the field and then provide the value that we would like to set in there. And you can see that the control adjusts automatically. If I select a date field, it will be a date chooser. If it's a text field, I can simply type in any text. And if it's a pick list, do we have a pick list in here? Not in here. Yes, here we have. So then you will find also pick list options in here. So with this, we can set the values for single pick list fields, date fields, checkboxes, and also single line text fields. Now, the third option allows us to copy values. So we can define that the value of one field should be copied to another one. This can be very handy for backup purposes, because maybe you need to replace one field with another one, or maybe you change the configuration of a field and you want to make sure that the existing data is not get lost. Therefore, you might want to copy the values of a specific field. Or maybe once you import the data, you might notice that all of them, they have a title, but they don't have a description yet. And you just want to make sure that there's a value inside of the description. Therefore, you could also define that the title should be copied into a description field, for example. Again, this does not support image fields and multi-pick list fields, but at least the majority of the fields with checkboxes, date fields, single pick list, and single line text fields, obviously. And please keep in mind that usually the fields here should match, so they should be compliant. You cannot copy from, let's say, from a single line text field into a single pick list field. These fields really have to match, but the console will tell you if the copy operation works or not. Now, the next option is clearing a field. So maybe you have a field that was used in the past, or maybe you just want to store something for locating items and records for the filtering, or with the filters on the left-hand side. And afterwards, maybe you want to clear the field, then you can do so as well. Simply select the field, and then the given values will be cleared. Next in the list is the set ownership. We saw this already. So here we can select another user, which will become the owner. This will just be the owner itself. It's not additional ownership. It's really the owner. Therefore, it's based on users, but the user pick list is set automatically, obviously. We saw the transition capability as well already. You simply select your transition. You can provide a comment here afterwards if you want to, and then a comment will be added to the workflow action. But actually, this is about performing workflow transitions with the given records. Now, sometimes there's the need to do even more than what is provided in this list. And therefore, there's also a generic action here, which is called run script. This gives you the chance to select an on-demand script that has been defined in context of the given workspace, and you can run this script against the given records. So if you ever have a need to do more complex stuff, you can create your own script, attach it as on-demand script to the workspace, and then let this utility run the script for you. This gives you the chance to do much more things, and also with this you would be able to perform actions which are not allowed to your user account for security reasons, because you can run the scripts, and scripts, they will always run in the super user context, so they will not be restricted by access permissions. And therefore this also might be of help, because you can basically process any kind of data, no matter what your permission setup is. But actually this will run the script. Now, final action is archive records. If you ever have to clean up data, if you want to remove records, but do not want to use the purge feature because you do not want to clear everything, but just select the data, then make use of the archive feature, which is at the end of the list. So you can see there are a lot of actions, and with the filtering, you can already or select a lot of actions that you would like to perform. Now let's finish with the options on the right-hand side. And there's one flag that is very important that I want to highlight. It's the first one. This is about how the system should select the data. And you must be cautious about this flag, because this might cause unexpected results. Now, the reason for this flag is that maybe you're going to filter for some data set, and then when you perform the actions, your filter result might change. Let's assume you filter by a property. Let's say you filter for records that do not have a title defined, but then you define an action to update the title so that now the title will contain a value. In this case, the search criteria or search results will change, and the system usually, when it processes the data, it will query for a set of records. Usually it will be 100 records that it will locate first. Then it processes this 100 records, and then it will search for the next 100 records, process these, and then search for the next 100 records, and so on and so on. But after processing the first 100 records, the data might have changed. And what were the next 200 records in the first query maybe now are the first 100 records, because the results have changed. And long story short, you just have to define if the filters that you define on the left-hand side are impacted by whatever action you take on the data. So if the action that you take on the data will impact the search results that match your filters, then please select this option in here to let the system know that now it should restart the query from the beginning, because it should not continue the sequence of queries because the result has changed. But if you do not change the resulting data, just stay with the default, and then it will just go from the first 100, second 100, third 100, fourth 100, and so on. Further down below, we have some optional options. And the first four fields here now are of value because maybe you want to store a property or flag on the records that were processed so that you can filter them out, or maybe perform a second action on these records afterwards. And here there are four options that allow you to apply some post-processing to the data once the action has been completed. So for example, maybe you want to store the current date on these records so that you can search for them later on and apply another action on them. Or maybe you just have a checkbox in the item details and you want to tick the checkbox. I don't have a checkbox in here, but if there would be any, I can either check it or uncheck it, depending on what your criteria are. And we can also clear a field value. So maybe you have a flag on the records that you set during the import of the data to indicate that these records still require some post-processing in these utilities. Then you can now let the utility clear the field as well so that these records will not be processed once again. So this is just about some post-processing on the data, which will only occur if this action here was a success on the given record. Finally, we also have some options that allow us to control the runtime of the processing of the data. The first one is quite obvious, is just a test run. So if you are not sure if your search criteria and workspace view will really reveal or return the data that you want to process, then you can make this a test run only, because in this case you will only find the data in the console that would be processed, but the system will not change anything on the data. Now, the second option is the request count. During the previous examples, you might have noticed that the system always processes multiple records at the same time to save some processing time. You can submit multiple requests at the same time, wait for all of them to be finished before we process the next set of data. But unfortunately, you cannot scale this endlessly, because if you increase the workload too far, then this could be considered as a DDoS attack, denial of services, and therefore you should be cautious with the requests count that you select. Keep it at a reasonable limit, and therefore you can adjust it in here, and usually the system is working with a request count of 3, which should be safe. But fortunately, there's also the next toggle, which is called dynamic requests count, and this is enabled per default. So with this option enabled, the system will automatically validate the processing time of the previous set of requests and see if this is within the recommended bandwidth. And if it's within this range, then it will try to add one more request for the next package. So it will continuously increase the request count until it's reaching the threshold limit. Maybe then take a step back and then even take a further step back if it's still beyond the threshold limit. So with this, it will automatically adjust the request and you don't need to worry about the request count, but still will get the best processing time with this utility. Obviously, there can always be some errors. Maybe your user is not allowed to perform the action, or your script is throwing an error, or maybe there's an error in configuration. With this maximum errors flag, you can let the system stop after a maximum number of errors. Once there is a maximum of 50 errors right now, or once it reaches the 51st error now, then the process will just stop and not continue any longer. And then finally, there's a search size. I guess you would never adjust this value, but what this does is that this defines the number of records that are retrieved with the next search, which will then be processed afterwards. And with that, this is all of the list of options. Usually, I would recommend not to adjust them. They are predefined already. You can make use of this property seen here. You should always be cautious of this filter. See if your filter criteria or the search result of your filters will be impacted by the action, and then select the right option. And well, that's the data manager. I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Let me know about your experience. With that, thank you very much for your time and have fun with Fusion Manage.